Over the years, I've seen an image pop up of an underwater clown. In an age where AI rules over search results, it makes you do double takes on images you see on social media. You can't always believe what you see, but you can believe that Glurpo, the underwater clown, is in fact 100% real. And due to it being a popular request for me to cover, with it recently making the rounds on Twitter again, my curiosity did in fact get the best of me. And of course, I had to find out more. So let's put on our scuba suits as we take a deep dive into this clown history. Honk honk, it's Bouncy here! To first understand Glurpo the underwater clown, we need to understand why there was a clown underwater to begin with. And that brings us to the interesting story of the theme park, Aquarena Springs. Aquarina Springs, located in San Marcos, Texas, first opened to the public in 1950, where the San Marcos Springs form the San Marcos River. However, the San Marcos Springs carry with them a very interesting history. In the book Large Springs and Early American Indians by Joel L. Shiner, he writes that archaeologists believe that the area around the springs is one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites in all of North America. The San Marcos Springs were and continue to be extremely important to the Native American people of the area, and they consider them to be integral to their creation stories. So it's unfortunate that at some point in time, these springs did in fact become home to a theme park. The land itself changed hands numerous times between many different owners, from Spanish settlers to eventually a general named General Edward Burleson. From him, a man named A.B. Rogers would purchase the land and build a large hotel on the land called Spring Lake Park Hotel, which was later renamed to the Landmark Inn. The land would change hands once again when in the late 1940s, Paul Rogers, the son of A.B. Rogers, would repurchase it. Paul would purchase a large rowboat with a glass bottom. This rowboat would showcase the beauty of the springs and the waters itself, alongside the beauty and lush vegetation of the area. There was also a lot of wildlife like turtles, fish, and alligators that you could see more clearly from the glass bottom of the rowboat. So because of this, the rowboat itself was very popular, and Paul realized that capitalizing on it and developing larger boats would be advantageous. After that, Paul had the idea to get some inspiration from other businessmen who had similar properties as him. So he went on a vacation with his family to Florida and was greatly inspired by Weeki Wachee Springs. Weeki Wachee Springs was a tropical tourist attraction that's biggest draw-in at the time were its underwater mermaids. Seeing a vision for San Marcos Springs, he set out to bring those tropical vibes all the way to Texas, and would start by dredging up a portion of the lake to install a 125-seat movable submarine theater. The submarine theater was the first of its kind, and it was built and designed by engineers in Switzerland. The theater would let guests on and then submerge them underwater to view the performance. The submarine theater would officially open in 1951, and around this time, the highway systems were being built and used often, and more people were driving cars, which led to more people traveling to fun locations with their families, and that led to a demand for more and more quirky tourist attractions. Aquarina Springs would be there to supply that roadside demand, offering not only the submarine theater, which had never been done or seen before, but the aforementioned glass-bottom boats where you could view the beautiful crystal waters with from right below your feet. They also famously featured Ralph the swimming pig, who actually has his own documentary, and alongside of that there were the Swiss sky rides, and at the time a western themed area called Texana Village. There was quite a lot to offer in Aquarina Springs. There was even a big volcano and just a lot of stuff that added to the tropical vibe that made people feel like they were definitely not in Texas. But the charm was truly to be found in that submarine theater, which was featured in a 1952 magazine called Popular Mechanics, which also showcased a diagram inside of how the theater itself worked and operated. So, to paint the picture, the guests would go inside the theater would submerge itself underwater, and beautiful women would swim around and perform. These women were called Aquamaids, which were a play on Aquarina and, of course, the word mermaid. And they were Aquarina's version of the Weeki Wachee mermaids that they saw when they went to Florida. But really, these type of mermaids were more or less like ballerinas, and that's pretty much what the Aquamaids did under the water. Originally during the shows, the women would wear one-piece bathing suits with swim fins, goggles, and sometimes a tutu. They wouldn't wear mermaid attire actually until the 1970s. These performers were doing this underwater work without professional diving equipment, so they learned to do these underwater performances, stunts, and tricks with the help of a nearby hose. In an interview with Austin Monthly, Shirley Rogers, the daughter of Paul Rogers, explained how she was able to work as an Aquamaid and broke down how they were able to use these hoses. She explained that the underwater performers were made to do 8 weeks of breath control training to learn how to remain at a given depth without rising or sinking, and this was actually all a part of the beginning of the performance. The Aquamaid would come out and do a buoyancy demonstration. She would take a big breath of air and show how the oxygen forced them to move. A big breath of air would shoot her upward, and a big exhalation would push her downward. So in order to stay completely still, the Aquamaids would learn to take short breaths over and over. They would even show off for the crowd and make an underwater picnic drinking drinks under the water. With that being said, it's obvious how integral the hose was to the safety of the underwater performers. And so, someone was needed to hold this hose and keep the performers safe. And who might that have been? Well, Glurpo, of course. Actually, if we go back to that magazine cover, he's there, and he's even in the diagram. So, Glurpo the Clown was designed to help assist the Aquamaids with their hose, but due to the popularity of clowns at the time, they also utilized him as an integral part of the performance and an important part of the park. So, Paul Rogers would actually bring in Don Russell and Margaret Russell from Weeki Wachee. Don Russell and Margaret Russell were the people that were doing the choreography for the mermaids, and they were really important and part of a lot of the creative direction of Weeki Wachee. So it was low-key like a little bit shady that Paul Rogers pretty much poached Don Russell and Margaret, but it would be Margaret who would actually go on record to say that her and Don were the ones who had the initial inspiration to create Glurpo. She said in an interview at 91 years old that it seemed like clowns would be an interesting and entertaining element to enhance the underwater ballet aspect, and the idea of a clown in the end did also help draw in people to Aquarena Springs itself as a mascot of sorts, so she was really right on the nose with that idea. When it came to Glurpo's appearance, his appearance was basically thought out with the water in mind. So he had a suit of really light nylon fabric, and this fabric would help him move pretty well under the water, and they would use a rubber mask with a clown on it that, besides holding up underwater better than obviously makeup, was also easier to see and identify by the audience. And on this mask, he also had a tiny cowboy hat because it was Texas. Like, of course he had a tiny cowboy hat. Yeah, tiny cowboy hat. Glurpo himself did an array of fun tricks and was a huge part of the park itself going forward, especially as he became more popular. So for instance, he was even painted on an updated version of the submarine theater itself in the 1960s, which used to originally depict King Triton. And Glurpo himself, he had 2 main acts. So the first was that he would use a camera and a framed mirror that would allow him to appear to be taking photographs of kids that he picked out of the audience. And the second, really big thing that he did that everybody loved was Glurpo would take a big puff off an underwater pipe and blow smoke underwater. And really what it actually was just condensed milk, but it was super shocking to the audience, especially the little kids who really thought Glurpo was smoking underwater. They couldn't get over it. He also had occasional sidekicks, and these sidekicks were called the Glurpettes. So Paul Rogers' daughter, who talked about being an Aquamaid before, actually played one of these when the parks were really crowded and they would run out of clowns. So the Glurpettes were female Glurpos. They were basically just Aquamaids in Glurpo masks, and they would run around and help Glurpo. And there were also male versions of these called Bubblios. And because even Glurpo needed assistance with the hose itself, this is why that role existed. When it came to Glurpo himself, the role was passed between many different people who played Glurpo. So honestly, the role of Glurpo was usually held by very, very fit, very handsome young men who were very skilled underwater. These people had to have good breath control, good lung control. They were very fit in this type of skill, and they would basically rotate out this role. So it's kind of similar to the way that there isn't just one Ronald McDonald. Glurpo was the main role, but they had a little bit of a rotation of different men that played Glurpo. In 1953, it would be one of these Glurpos, but people really aren't sure which one, that would fly to Hollywood to appear on an episode of the TV show You Asked For It. Don Russell, who I mentioned earlier, that was the choreographer for the underwater performers, would actually go on record and be interviewed by a local newspaper about this matter, and this is what he would comment. Glurpo intends to really wow his public on the TV program as he presents his unique routines, and then he would say, despite the fact that pretty Aquamaids are the main attraction of Aquarina's underwater stage show, Glurpo boasts that he can not only do everything that the girls do, but also can show the fish and diving ducks a few tricks. Although there were many different Glurpos, one notable clown to first play this role was a man named Bob Smith. And Bob Smith would actually meet the love of his life, Mary Beth Singer, at Aquarena Springs. Mary Beth was an Aquamaid who would just so happen to fall deeply in love with Bob. So an Aquamaid fell in love with Glurpo. They would actually get married underwater at the Aquarena Submarine Theater, and in order to do this, they would weigh down their clothing with lead weights, and the entire event was actually publicized by Life magazine in 1954. So not only is Glurpo the world's first underwater clown, he was also a clown who got married to an underwater ballerina for the whole world to see, and the wedding photos are some of the most beautiful oral farming photos I have ever seen. I look at these photos and I think, wow, I will never be half as cool as this couple. Even their family in the audience watched the wedding from the submarine theater. I don't think you could have a cooler wedding than that. After this, Glurpo popularity would also lead to a funny stunt to get more attention to Aquarina Springs. He would run for president of the San Marcos Junior Chamber of Commerce and then run for the president of the United States. That's where we get the photo that everyone's passing around in the first place, which I think is funnier with the Glurpo for state president still on it. But eventually, Glurpo would unfortunately lose his clown mask in the 60s and really just rely on his fun suit and clownish routines until unfortunately Paul Rogers, the owner, would die in 1965. When this would happen, the new owners would also change the theme of the park into like a Polynesian theme, and they would change the role of Glurpo, unfortunately, into like a really cringy witch doctor, and they would force the Glurpo actors to like wear a grass skirt, and just it was a mess. And the new owners at the time, like, they thought they were keeping things current, but they weren't. It was really just, it wasn't working out for them. And honestly, as new parks would open, especially like Six Flags was opening nearby, Aquarina Springs would close in the 90s. So after it closed, Texas State University would buy it in 1994 and turn it into an environmental research education facility. There were still some remnants of the abandoned park that remained, and they were actually photographed between 2005 and 2012 by a San Marcos native named Andy Heatwole. And in them, you can actually see them draining and digging up the Aquarina Theater, which had already been replaced once in the 70s due to a flood, but it's still very interesting to see it unearthed after all that time, especially in comparison to what it used to look like in the beginning. And you can also see in the photos there were other abandoned and interesting parts of the park that were left to sit, and you can just see like how the earth grew around them. These were photographed just in time because they were actually taken away and demolished. In 2014, almost everything in relation to Aquarina area was demolished, and they planted native prairie grasses and other plants on the land in order to restore it closer to what it would have been like had these people never touched it. They wanted it to look like it should have looked like. So now, Spring Lake is seen as a natural lake area that you can visit that has been overseen by the Meadow Center, and it is getting back to its roots as a wildlife area. Although the Aquarina Springs were a fun and interesting park with lots of quirky and kitschy roadside entertainment, originally we need to remember that this land was sacred, and it is returning back to those roots. In fact, native tribes still maintain their connection to this area through their Indigenous Cultures Institute, and they do even offer guided tours. Interestingly enough, San Marcos itself would go on to become the mermaid capital of Texas because of the Aquamaids in Aquarena Springs. And all around San Marcos, remnants of this rich history of the land do remain with their mermaid statues. Each statue, representing different meanings, brings a fun and colorful take on history. One of these mermaids is called an Ode to Ralph, and she is actually holding a mermaid-like aquatic pig. This mermaid is a direct reference to Aquarina Springs and Ralph the Swimming Pig, while other mermaids depict the native roots of the land and pay tribute to its cultural importance. But as for keeping the spirit of Glurpo alive, there was even the very first ever Glurpo Fest held in San Marcos, Texas of April 2025 this year. The charm of Glurpo does ultimately live on in the hearts of many. So that about dives as deep as we can when it comes to Glurpo, the underwater clown. I hope you enjoyed this fun little tidbit of lore as much as I did, and if you really love clowns, whether that be lore, types of clowns, how to be a clown, just clowns in general, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks everybody, bye bye!